How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Unfinished Legacy Podcast, Men of Color Edition. My name's Anthony.
Brian.
I'm Derwin.
No, Shay.
So today we're gonna be talking about code switching. It's gonna be our first episode, part one. So still with us, but no longer in the Thrive Center. Alright, so my name is Brian. I work front desk here. I was part of the MOC cohort my freshman year, and then I worked with Anthony under Juan last year as interns for the Men of Color Coalition.
Like I mentioned, my name is Anthony. I'm a junior. I was also, of course, in the Men of Color cohort with Brian, and I'm a peer mentor with the Thrive Center.
And my name is Derwin. Again, I work here at Thrive Center as coordinator for outreach and advocacy / strengths coach. I was also working with Juan as an assistant. I wasn't really connected with MLC per se, but I was working, helping him out, and supporting him in a group.
My name is Shay. I work here at Thrive as a peer mentor, and I was part of the Men of Color Coalition for last year.
So we have a video. I don't know if anyone's ever seen Big Mouth. I'm personally a pretty big fan. We're gonna watch this video on code switching.
You don't have one of these?
What?
You don't have a code switch?
No. How does a code switch work?
Well, it's a little tricky, but let me break it down for you. As a black kid, you gotta learn this handy trick of social self-defense. You switch up your speak and give your manner a tweak depending on the audience. It's called code switching, and I'm a master of the dial. I got a different me for every situation. No matter black, white, old or young, I can tune into your tongue, and nobody can tell which one's the real me, yeah.
For older blacks out, dial it back, play the respectful grandson role. They don't care for rap or hip-hoppity crap, so I'm warm as Motown soul. And I can charm the old school Italian cats with a smile like Sammy Davis. But I always know that as soon as I go, they go straight back to Stone Cold racist. Code switching, got the whole world on my dial, and it's anybody's guess which one is me.
Reactions? Question mark. Is the video accurate related to your experiences?
You should hear from you first, then, Brian.
Oh, I bet. I think it's accurate to a degree. I mean, it is like a cartoon, so it is a little exaggerated. But I don't necessarily look at code switching as like a bad thing, because I think we all code switch. It just depends on how you define it. So like, I'm not gonna act the same way I do with Anthony that I would with Don. Don's my supervisor. I wouldn't act the same way. But the way the video is portraying it is you're kind of changing like your whole personality based on who you're around. And I think that to a degree, it is kind of like that, especially depending on the setting. I think we all code switch, regardless of race and ethnicity. I think we all necessarily code switch.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think, though, code switching is a bit racialized, and it's more prevalent in those settings because, historically, right, keeping up with like the themes of professionalism and just formal, like being formal, and those are associated with white settings, and that's something I can relate to. And that growing up in like a predominantly white community my whole life, like it's something that I've developed. Like I know everybody has a code switch of their own style, but it's something that in the racialized aspect that I can relate to, and that like I've used heavily in my life, and it's an advantage, and it can be an advantage, and it can be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate y'all's insight on that topic, and especially on the video. I find it really interesting because, being a person of color coming out of the reservation on into the city, right, and then working in institutions such as we are in, we do have to do that to navigate it in order to get a step up or even to make connections or advocate on our own behalf or on our populations or communities or our student bodies to get attention to what we need or things of that nature, right, regarding resources. So we do that a lot. I know I do that a lot in all the spaces that I move within and around. Like right now, right, how I'm dressed is a different kind of code switching in a sense, right, to fit in with the institution's policies and I guess persona of how we present ourselves. At the same time, I try to keep cultural relevance to identify with those my people, you could say my native people, regarding, they can still connect me, they can still approach me, things of that nature. So yeah, I think we do it on a regular basis in various different settings. So I agree with the video, and I find the video very interesting and just fun to watch in a sense. But it brings out a lot of things in a cartoon setting that we want to say to, we want to talk about, want to express it. But I think in artistic expression, it really brings out a different kind of perceptions on different ways of viewing it. So yeah.
Well, those are great points. I mean, kind of run out of stuff to say, but I would say from personal experience, I live a very compartmentalized life. So my work life, my personal life, my school life, it's very distinct and different. And how I come up and how I approach the energy that I give in those different aspects of my life is also different. And I kind of find the video quite relatable. I think I usually say this. One of my friends actually said this to me recently, especially also with my accent. I tend to code switch also when it comes to my accent. Like the way that I talk to my grandma and the way that I talk to my parents are two different ways. And the way that I talk to my friends back at home and my friends here, they're two different ways. And I have a friend who's here, and he kind of exposed that in me also. He's like, man, your accent is way thicker. Like after 9 p.m., you're hungry, you're angry. I'm like, dude, it's crazy. And I actually, I kind of listened to myself in those situations, and I found out that was kind of the case, especially when I was hungry. So it's pretty interesting, and I feel like what Brian said, code switching is not a bad thing. Even in business, I was reading this, I think it's a Harvard Business Review, and they were looking at the different types of leaderships, right? Different types of leadership styles. There's the authoritative leader, there's the leader that says, I want you to figure it out. There's the leader that says, that is more, I think that more connects with people on the emotional level. So they were looking at all these different types of leaderships, and they were saying, which leadership style is the best, and which leadership style gives success and brings up a great team. And what they found out was none of them is the best, but a great leader usually has all of the different leadership styles in their back pocket. They have the ability to pick up the right leadership style at the right time for the right situation. So for example, if things in a company that are going south, things are crazy, the company is doing bad, hemorrhaging money, you need an authoritative leader to come in and install values and get people's levels up. But you cannot have that over the long period of time. You also need somebody who's gonna tend to the employees' emotional needs. You also need somebody who's gonna care for the employees. You also need somebody who's gonna give the employees the platform for them to express their own genius. So you need to be able to be a very good code switcher to be a good leader.
I agree with that. I mean, especially in a world where in the professional setting, people like us are very underrepresented. You don't see a lot of people like us in professional settings.
Right.
I think it's very important to have a code switch. I wouldn't act the way I do. By the way, I'm from Jersey, so I wouldn't act the way I act back home in a professional setting. I just wouldn't. Like I act completely different. So yeah, I think it is very important. And I mean, we kind of already got into this, but what are some times that you have noticed yourself code switching?
Like I said earlier, it's like highlighting my upbringing. I went to a K through 8 school throughout my childhood that there were only 4 people of color in the school out of hundreds of students. And so obviously I would go to school and like I have to act a certain way in the classroom. It was expected to be a good student, and part of being a good student was being professional or being, polite, things like that of that nature that are associated with whiteness. But I mean, that was a stark difference between my school life and my personal life, whether that be in sports or just like going and hang out with friends. Down from my school, it was instilled in me from a very young age. Like I'm talking different, I wear different clothes, and that's not necessarily a part of it, but it goes with the code switch, and like creating a whole different personality and persona when you're with 2 different groups. And it also highlight upon I grew up also in a predominantly white family, and so seeing certain family members being just different family members' houses, I'm acting different there than I am at home, or if I'm at a relative of color's house. So those are just the different realms that it's come up in my life.
I think I noticed myself doing that, code switching a lot when I'm within my own community. I think there's really the difference between that is very like, how would you say, it's very opposite, right? Zipper and Velcro in a world. I go to my community where I can connect with my native people or even my dead relatives. It's totally different because you have connections back at home, not only just the connections of the persona symbolism, but also smell, feel, taste, right? And experiences that we all share together. And so we can talk about things in our own language too, in dialect, and just really get into the conversation and laugh and tease about things. And that's one thing about my community is that we tease a lot. And it gets to the point where, some people don't like to be teased a lot, but it's from our family and our relatives, we love to really tease. And so I think code switching is like that would be in the community here. But when I come into the office, it's totally different. There's a perception like I'm straight as a board, you could say, right? Because you have to walk a line. There's certain things you can and cannot do. There's certain things that you can say within a certain public, right? Especially when you're wearing this name tag, right? Because you're representing something else. You're just not representing, you're representing something else, a hierarchy, a position, a persona too. And so it's really, in that sense, there's only certain ways you can talk to certain people too in certain ways. So you got to be mindful of that. So I find myself doing that, switching in and out of, various communities I walk into. I can leave this space and go into a different space, and maybe somebody of my own age, experience, or background, right? We can connect on certain things too as well. And, you can see that change very quickly. And then they'll switch quickly when I'm speaking with somebody else, right? A student or something of that nature, right? And so I do that. I think we do that multiple times throughout the day. And so I find myself doing that a lot in different spaces I move around campus.
I think for me, I did go into it a little bit. From this side of my world, when I moved here, I think I did some type of code switching, but it wasn't as much because I do have another part of my life back at home. So usually I'll just code switch when I was speaking over the phone with somebody back at home, or I've not met a lot of people from Southern Africa, at least whether it's South Africa or Zim, here in Tucson. But I think that is also constrained my ability when it comes to code switching. So yeah, I do have just like a straight path, but when I do get on the phone with people back at home, I do a lot of code switching. And then when I'm talking to my friends, I do a lot of code switching. And back at home as well, I used to do a lot of code switching because I think it's also very much instilled in our culture in terms of like respect for your elders. So you do not actually, the way you speak to your elders, the way you speak to anybody older than you, be it your parents, be it your grandparents, be it, even somebody who's just an elder in the community, is way different from the way that you speak to the peers that are at your level and the peers that are the people that are also below you. That is also one aspect that I grew up. It's something that I had been doing, but it's actually up to now, when it's brought to light. I'm like, oh, we used to do that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a predominantly, how do I say it, Afro-Latino neighborhood, North Bergen, New Jersey, shout out. It's like a little bit Italian, a lot of Caribbeans. Jersey is just very diverse, specifically my neighborhood. It's specifically closer to New York. I mean, people know New York City is one of the most diverse cities in the world. And North Bergen is a suburb, but it is, it's populated like an urban community. And so I didn't really start code switching until I started working. Because as a kid in middle school and in high school, like, I dressed the same, I spoke the same slang I used. I even used it with my teachers. The relationship I have with my supervisor here with Don and I had with Juan was very reminiscent of the relationship I had with my high school teachers back home, because with them I feel like I can really be myself. But with speaking about like my other jobs that I worked, when I first arrived here, I worked in a restaurant. It was called Wild Garlic Grill. Definitely one of the most culture shocking experiences in my life, because it was like a super high class restaurant, and like you rarely saw people of color in that restaurant, and the two owners weren't people of color, and I was the only person of color, one of the only people of color on the staff that worked in the front. Most of the people of color that were in that restaurant worked in the kitchen, and they were dishwashers. I was the only one who worked in the front, and it was a very humbling experience, because it was one of the first times where I really had to like hide myself and hide my personality and hide the person that I am, because if not, I was gonna make other people around me uncomfortable. And it kind of I did kind of feel like unfair at some point, because I feel like, yeah, I also like I wasn't gonna go in there and like, you know, dab up my boss like I would Anthony, you know, like, but at the same time, it kind of did suck, because I felt like I couldn't look at people a certain way without being labeled something that isn't a characteristic of mine. You know what I'm saying? And it really does suck when those type of settings, because coming here to Tucson was just such a culture shock for me, because I had never been in a classroom or in any type of setting growing up where I was the only person of color. Every single job I've ever worked at in North Bergen, in Jersey, there was always a plethora of people of color, and specifically Caribbeans that looked just like me. So it was definitely very different coming here, and I've noticed myself code switching a lot more here than I ever did back home. Next question. We kind of already went over this, but is code switching always negative?
So I'm gonna contrast what I last said and like my main point, what it's been so far. And like Brian was talking about earlier, code switching isn't even always racialized, right? And in that by that line of thinking, it doesn't always have to be negative. And like Brian was talking about, like with just the mentorship from like Juan and figures of that nature. We miss you, buddy. You know, he's told me before, right? And just talking to me, right? You know, you wouldn't act the same as you would at a frat party as you would in your science lab. You know what I mean? Or think like you wouldn't talk to your professor the way you would talk to your little brother, right? You know what I mean? So I think it's just in all the basis of code switching is just altering your tone, your slang, the way you talk. Maybe your appearance in a little bit of a way, like as that ties in with like your verbal speech, and like it's 100% correct that everybody does it. You know, like everybody has that aspect to the personality, and so it, like in that way you can use it to be a positive, and it doesn't have to be a negative kind of factor that you think about.
Yeah, I don't think it is negative. I think it's more a way of expanding your who you really are, identity wise, right? You're expanding, you're sharing out, you're expressing your true identity in a sense, right, to others who maybe not really know that part of you, and you're sharing that knowledge and experience with them. So it's really more of a teaching moment in a sense too, as well, not only for the people that you're interacting with, but even for yourself, right? I think there's some aspects of it that can be perceived as negative, right? Like me coming to work, or even going to like a big, you know, meeting of something, right, with administrators and leadership across the institution, where I'm not clean cut, you could say, right? Because culturally, I'm connected to our long hair as Native people, right? As a meaning, as a purpose behind it. There's stories and philosophies behind that. And so, you know, I'm not going to cut my hair to fit in with the persona in a sense, right? Because of that. But so that could be seen as negative in a sense, right? And maybe I'm just assuming, I don't know, but I've heard it over the years that, well, you're not clean cut, or you're not sitting in the position where you should be personifying yourself in those spaces, because you wouldn't fit in. You go into these meetings, everyone's clean cut, you could say, right? And we're not really following those aspects of it. So it could be seen negative in that sense from the other perspective, or how we may perceive we're being viewed or addressed or even identified, right? And so those are things that kind of float out there in between. Maybe they don't say it out loud, but they're maybe thinking it. We don't know, but that can create a different kind of conversation or interaction too as well. So I think those are some things that kind of run through my mind, but I don't think it fully is all negative. I think there's a lot of good components in it too as well.
I think adding on to that, if were to also give the devil his due and say that code switching is indeed negative, I think one person might also argue, you know, that you're not being true to who you are and true your personality as a person. If we look at personality as it is, it's not merely binary. It's not 1 and 0. It's not happy or sad. It's a whole spectrum in and of itself. So I think that works as a counterexample to the argument that code switching is negative, because I'm not just one person at any specific situation. I can be one person here, I can be one person in that kind of situation. Whatever that situation caused me to be, even if we look at our biological nature as humans, the same way that you react when you see a dog is not the same way that you react when you see a snake. If you do that, if you react the same way when you see a dog, when you see a snake, it's not going to be a good day. So you definitely have to bring out some part of you, a different part of you, to a certain and specific situation. So, I think in a nutshell, just adding on to what you guys said.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. I know I kind of tested it in the beginning. I don't always think that code switching is negative, but Derwin really did bring up a good point about the hair thing. I mean, as people of color, I think we take a lot of pride in our hair. I think people in general should take pride in their hair, but I think specifically as people of color, we should take pride in our hair. I'm Dominican, and in Dominican culture, and especially in Latino culture, usually if you have curly hair, they call it pelo malo, so like bad hair. If you have curly hair, more Afrocentric hair, and you're forced to buzz it. And as a kid, I always had to buzz my hair because having my curls out was like unprofessional. And I was told like, when I first started applying to jobs, like, you have to cut your hair because now you're not gonna get hired. Me being the kid that I was, I had big ass hair. I didn't cut it, so I just stayed with it. But in those instances, yes, it's negative, but it's not always negative. I think the points you guys brought up are extremely valid. I mean, it's not always negative. You kind of have to have a code switch, especially as a person of color. So that's just how it is. All right. So last question is, when are you truly yourself, or do you feel like you're just different versions of yourself around different people?
Oh, so this is something that I've thought about and has given me existential crises throughout my entire life. And it's really interesting because people that are close to me have told me, and noticed and pointed out to me, they're like, Anthony, you're so different around these type of people than when you're around these type of people. And I know it's been categorized like, oh, that's Anthony's black voice or that's Anthony's white voice. So it just depends on what situations warrant it, right? And it really impacts that being noticed impacts your identity, your view of your own identity, but in feeling like yourself and in me feeling like myself, over time I feel like it's just become something that's so normal. It's subconscious, and it doesn't often or always reflect the setting that I'm in and the people that I'm around, but like Derwin was saying, the situation. There's sometimes situations that warrant being more serious in tone, and sometimes it can be really casual and nonchalant. So,
Nonchalant.
Speaking of which, join the nonchalant club.
Shameless plug.
Check it out, Juan TJ.
Yeah, look at him. But so it can make you feel like you're different versions of yourself if you're really hyper aware of it. But I think over time it's something that, especially as a person of color, you grow to love about yourself, and something that you see as just another tool in your toolbox, and as you navigate certain situations. So.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When are you truly yourself, and do you feel that you are just different version of yourself around different people? That really hits home, because even in the office, right, my professional staff colleagues that I work with, my Latinx brothers and sisters, right, we connect on a whole different level compared in our offices when we're talking, we can express and really be our true selves and share a bit about who we are. But when we step out of those spaces around the students, we'll share a little here and there, but we won't share as much, right? And so I feel like I'm trying to be a true, authentic me, but at the same time, it's very difficult to do in some spaces, right? And so, but definitely it does make you really think about all the different personalities, identities that you carry with you, right? on an everyday basis. And so it just all depends on what the place and situation that you're at. And when I first came to school, it was really different back then. I went to the all Indian school, right? My first institution I went to, it was called, over in Mississippi. And so it was different tribal nations were everywhere. So it was different in those interactions. And tribal college, it was different too, because it was your own people, both majority. Then you go to a different institution too as well. And you get connected with other communities, other identities, and so. But here is majority. The data says that it's a majority white institution, and so yeah, you're very navigating these very different places, and sometimes you feel like you're not being your true self, especially when you're talking about advocating on certain issues and topics, right? You want to really express what you really feel, but sometimes you got to hold back on some of those things because it's a balance. It's a balance, right? And so I think you're balancing that whole tightrope, you could say, right? Walking that line, and where can you navigate? Where can you really be your true self? Where can you really do these things? So you got to choose a time and place, and which battles or which opportunities that you want to really put your full self out there, And so I think it's just being very mindful about that. But you do find those communities where you can really express yourselves, especially when you get to know people a little bit more, like our upperclassmen, student staff, right? Some of you all know me through our experience that we've had, and we share things with one another, right, on a personal level. So I think those are different kind of experiences too, compared to the younger staff members coming in. You got to kind of see who they are, feel each other out, and get the understanding of where can you go, what are the boundaries and things of that nature. I think that plays a lot within it too as well. So thanks.
I think also adding on, I like that Anthony, you mentioned something with regards to existential crisis. It's something that I've felt quite a number of times when it comes to code switching, because I'm like, all right, so if I'm acting this way with this person in this setting, then what's my personality basically? But alluding to what I just said previously, it's a spectrum, right? And you just have to bring out what the situation calls for. But I think amongst all that, you should just have a baseline, and you should just have a foundation. And basically this foundation should be your core principles and beliefs that you live by as an individual. So, being kind, being loving, being respectful, being courageous, being brave. And, you can have your personality go from, point A to C, point C to J. But as long as you know your baseline, your footing as a person, I think you're set for good, and that's who you truly are as a person. Those values and beliefs that that your personality is founded on. I think that's just really important. You can speak to different people in a different way, in a different tone. That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly okay. But you should always go back to that baseline and ask yourself, am I being respectful to this person? Am I being kind? Am I being empathetic? I think that is also really important.
Yes. Good
You
point.
bring up
Very good point.
a very good point that I'm gonna build off of. I think code switching is important, but you shouldn't compromise your core values just because of the person you're around. That's a very good point that you bring up. For me, in terms of who I am, code switching is like, I'm mixed. So like, I'm half black, half Hispanic. My dad's Dominican and Haitian. My mom's Hispanic, and I'm a Guatemalan. And it was always very weird growing up because I had two Spanish accents. So like, with my mom, I spoke in a more Guatemalan accent. And then with my dad, I spoke more with a Dominican accent. My Dominican family members, I spoke with more Dominican slang terms. With my mom's side of the family, I spoke with more Guatemalan slang terms. And it was just very difficult for me sometimes because I felt sometimes especially in school, I was only representing one side of myself. But I try my hardest to be both at the same time. And like I said, I grew up in a predominantly with people of color around me, and when I came here, it was a really big culture shock because I felt like to fit in, I kind of had to change myself, and especially before I got introduced to One and introduced to Thrive, my first semester I struggled a lot with making friends because I felt like I was kind of looked as an outsider, not just because I wasn't from Arizona, but because I spoke different, I dressed different. I completely carried myself in a different way. And I definitely struggled a lot my freshman year because of that. And so sometimes I do feel like I'm acting like different versions of myself around different people. And it is something that, like you guys said, that kind of existential crisis type of thing. Because I feel like, back home is when I really feel like I can be myself back in there. Because I'm around people that I've known my whole life that I grew up with. And then the only place here where I've ever felt like I can really be myself is Thrive. And like all the other multicultural centers here on campus. Because really in the classroom, I kind of like, believe it or not, I don't even talk. Like I sit in the back, I do my work, and I get out. I was like, I don't even stay for like chit chat or nothing. I just leave class and I come straight here. And I think as people of color, finding places like Thrive, finding places like for me at the Gorell Center has been a really good resource. Finding places like this where we could be ourselves and be unapologetically ourselves,
Yes.
I think is very important, not just for ourselves, but for our mental health. Finding MOC, finding Thrive. If it wasn't for that, I feel like I definitely wouldn't have made it to where I am now. So,
Definitely. I like that unapologetic self. And the core values don't compromise that. That is definitely so true. The baseline.
And-
Appreciate that.
And then wrapping it all up and like above it, for this question and this topic, like it's very important to recognize that, especially for people of color, like code switching can lead to you feeling detached from your culture, make you feel guilty, for conforming to maybe a different culture's like related actions and behaviors. I don't know, I felt that way before, but like Brian was saying, being able to find a center to be unapologetically yourself. That's ultimately what you can do to supplement, your well-being, because everybody code switches.
I guess that's everything for today. Thank you to Phoebe and Nicole for being here with us. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Do you have like an outro or something or something?
We should do an in memoriam
Till
of
next
Juan.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't die.
Pictures.
He didn't die.
Wanted to.